Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome poet, performer, and brilliant person all round. Please welcome Miss Jenny Lindsay.
Hello. Thank you all so much for sticking around for this talk. It is a bit like last thing during the school day. I can see some people are very, very sleepy. Can you give a huge round of applause to Viv just for being awesome, please? That would be great. Viv G actually gave me my first ever paid gig as a poet, so I always love seeing her around and about. So anyway, I'll get on with my talk. I'm going to talk a bit about my journey to Yes. And my journey to Yes coincided with my experience of being a teacher for the last 3 years. I've just finished up my last temporary contract. Because of this journey, my hopes for an independent Scotland have always been bound up with my hopes for Scottish education. Of course, education is devolved, and though I have always thanked my lucky stars for that, it's not enough. By way of an introduction, if you'd told me when I was younger that I would end up a teacher, I would have been amused and slightly horrified. I grew up in a small town in South Ayrshire, and high school was a wee bit of a battle. I was bored, I was bullied, I was disillusioned, and at my worst, I had 56% attendance. I left school in 1999, having scraped 2 Bs in my 5th year and 3 Bs in my 6th year. And I do mean scraped. I was a pragmatist, though. All I wanted was enough to escape. If I'd left school a decade later, in 2009, those grades would have made it a struggle to get into university. As it was, I got a place in my first choice. University was rapidly becoming just something you had to do, I remember, if you wanted to achieve success. I was 17, magnificently unclear about what I wanted to do, and I was living in a vibrant city full of exciting bars, clubs, and artistic happenings. I dropped out after a year. I worked in various jobs I didn't really struggle to find, including waitressing, bar work, and door-to-door sales. I benefited from the introduction of the minimum wage, and my rent was a reasonably affordable 175 quid a month. If I'd left school a decade later, in 2009, both my minimum wage and my rent would have been higher. The wage, meagerly, the rent, massively. Rent currently for a similar room in a shared flat is nearer 400 quid a month. If I'd left school a decade later, I would have been told similar things to what I was told in 1999, that a university education is a must-have to achieve success, that it's something you have to do if you want to be middle class, that it's something you must do straight from school. But now, there's an added dimension. I've heard young people panicked that they won't get into university, with a palpable fear that their life will be ruined if they don't get in, but at the same time as knowing that a degree is not a guarantee of any job. I've also heard young people give themselves and their peers a hard time for working in McDonald's or other minimum wage jobs, reflecting the way that privileged adult society unfairly views and paints these jobs. I've had young people tell me that they're worried about their exams, worried that they're stupid or failures already because they've internalized that menacing message told to them by undoubtedly well-meaning adults that if you screw up at school, you're screwed up for life. This, at the same time as young people are told that an A today means far less than it did 10 years ago, and certainly less than it did back in the days when a minority of people would get them. It's clear that some in their society find this narrative a comfort, the idea that affluence or degrees or mortgages or relatively stable employment were won through individual hard work alone, that structure and governance and opportunities had nothing to do with it. That young people now just need to try harder, rather than stopping, pausing and saying, there, but for the sake of 10 years or 20 or 45 years, go I. We're led to believe that young people are less skilled, less literate, less employable than we were. This is a nonsense. A little anecdote for you. In a lesson with an S3 class, in 2012, one girl explained to me her reasons for thinking she and most of her peers were probably going to vote no in the referendum. She was wearing a frown, and she had a perceptible unease at what she was saying, but she said, well, we know things are bad for us, but at least we know how they work. If anything can sum up in 2 sentences what finally led me to support independence, it was this. How we choose to educate young people at all ages and stages says a great deal about our priorities and values as a country. Secondary schools are also where wider social divisions are played out. Simultaneously, schools are asked to resolve those problems for which wider society has no answer, or sometimes which wider society serves to perpetuate. In any debates about education in the future, therefore, I think there needs to be 2 questions that are at the forefront of any policy proposals. First of all, what kind of society do we want to educate our young people for? And secondly, how best do we build that society? The latter, for me, is answered with a yes vote as a starting point only to addressing the first question. I know that I, for one, want to build a society where no young person looks at it through resigned eyes and says, well, I know it's bad, at least I know how it works. I can only hope that as an educator, I've managed to persuade enough of my students that politics isn't something that just has to happen at them. It's something that they can shape. I came into teaching at a particularly difficult time, during the upheaval of curricular change. There isn't the time to deconstruct the entirety of Curriculum for Excellence, but regardless of the undoubted positive aspects of CFE, exam results remain the mark of success, with National 5 ending, as I'm sure everyone knows, despite the lip service paid to other forms of assessment, with, in the majority of subjects, a massive, massive exam. Meaningful assessment of knowledge, understanding, and skills cannot be undertaken by exams alone, and yet teachers and educators, including myself, who know this fine well, have found themselves assessing students as D's, C's, B's, A's, or fails, dependent on their ability to write formulaic answers to prescribed questions within a time limit. Why? Teachers train themselves to assess in this way as easily as they could train themselves to assess in a more meaningful manner. I know that there'll be several teachers out there who can sympathise with handing a C to a student following a prelim who's displayed A-grade knowledge and understanding in talks, debates, and creative responses in class. But how can we tell if one student is better than the other? We must have standardisation and time limits and exams in order to ensure competition, to decide who should get the best place, the best award, the best jobs. In days when jobs were more plentiful, the damning effects of this were perhaps less obvious. But now, it's an employer's market. Let's be honest. The flexible jobs market that most of us who were born after the year 1979 are trying to get buy-in and that we're educating young people to join demands qualifications beyond what is necessary for most of those jobs. It involves a seemingly endless process of applying for, interviewing for, and competing for jobs that pay a wage far below what even the most meaningful of jobs would have paid about 30 years ago. Graduates unable to find graduate-level work will automatically be given favour, even though a degree is unnecessary, over young people who don't fulfil the criteria of being judged capable according to a system of assessment that examines in one way only and in a way that even those judging it find disconcerting. That is perhaps the biggest nonsense. And for those left behind in that competition, it's infantilizing, it's anxiety-making, and it has consequences that damage our entire society. That there's a felt need for big ideas to change this is obvious, but lordy, it is difficult. It's far easier then to talk of upskilling our young people, keeping them in formal education longer, and cruelly telling young people that their lack of success is their own darn fault. You should have tried harder in 4th year. You should have competed harder for that award. You should have impressed more in that 6-month unpaid internship in central London. Your 2-1s and your firsts don't mean what they used to. You need more skills. The independence in and of itself, may do nothing to change these damaging myths is a fact. That many voting no share these concerns is also a fact. That these are issues faced by young people across the UK and beyond is also a fact. So why vote yes? In short, because it's about time we recognised that there are alternatives. Because education systems and qualification systems do not exist in a vacuum. The reason that the onus remains in the qualification system on the number of A's achieved by pupils is because that is precisely what's currently demanded by wider UK society, by employers, by universities, by parents, by politicians, as a badge of excellence and success. Because there is a growing call for change of the society that our education system reflects and perpetuates, meaning devolution cannot be enough. Because when power is distant and remote, people either retreat or lash out. Because if there really is no alternative, then politics has lost all meaning. Because there is an alternative, and we can create it. To return to my student statement, she knows things are bad for us. That she used us shows that she understands that she's part of a community of peoples with a collective need for change. But at least we know how it works. Her resignation betrayed her belief that she had no collective agency. She had a lack of voice, and the best that she could do is hope that she wouldn't be at the bottom of the pile. And who can blame her? This is a system. Let's make it work for me. The trick is to get what you can out of it and keep going just the same. That this is an unsustainable way of being in human as well as social, political, and economic terms became clear to many of us growing up under New Labour. We were never all middle class now, and the ways in which we were told to try to become so were clearly unsustainable, short-termist, and required a disconnect from what might be best for all of us in favour of individual gain. But in terms of education, we do well to remember Hannah Arendt's quote that education is the point at which we decide if we love the world enough to assume responsibility for it. Education is not just systems and institutions. It's a role society plays and something we all have to take responsibility for. So I look forward to Scotland assuming responsibility because recognising where things are bad, dear former student of mine, that's the first step to being able to change them, not just challenge them. With power closer to home, this can only become easier. There, but for the sake of 10 years, go I. I'm voting yes, because of the recognition that my students, under the same system, with the same agenda and the same priorities, despite the supposed lessons learnt from the crash, continues to push the same rhetoric now that didn't make much sense 10 years ago, and it continues to make no sense now. This is our chance to change that, and that is the best lesson my students have taught me. It's an act of assuming responsibility for that lesson that leads me to vote yes for them. Thank you.